All right, go.
Welcome back to episode 26 of the Beyond the Snap podcast. Today we're talking everything Big Ten, and it is 1 week away from the college football season beginning. Officially in week 0 in Ireland. Lots of weird stuff happened. Late stage consumerism is getting to us all. But we will be previewing those games. But first, we got to jump into some Big Ten tier lists, like you've been seeing us do for all the other conferences. Have to give the Midwestern, not really Midwestern boys some love. But starting on this long conference tier list, um, well, we've got Michigan State. And
Yep.
Michigan State, they have a new head coach. They basically, Michigan State is the new Oregon State. They salvaged the remains of the carcass, the beaver carcass. Maybe they took the pelt and the bones and, all that stuff. I don't know how tasty beaver is.
Yeah.
And they transported it to Michigan. And it's the beginning of a rebuild for them, really. Jonathan Smith's trying to get into building what he wants to have at that Michigan State in that program. So honestly, I think this year in the Big Ten, they're a middle of the pack team. I don't think they can do anything better than that. They have some wide receiver talent, they've got some quarterback talent, but really outside of that, it's a very incomplete team.
Yeah. And I mean, they do have some stellar pieces like Aiden Childs that are sure to make an impact come this season. But I mean, it's not, again, they're not going to be able to hold a torch compared to teams like your last year's winner, Michigan, even Iowa for that matter, Ohio State, Oregon. I mean, we're talking about the second best conference in all of NCAA football. So, yeah, they're going to sit in the middle of the pack. Alrighty, next up we have the last year's winners of the entire thing, the Michigan Wolverines. Now, Kieran, where do we want to put these guys?
See, I think they're on I think they're a contender this year because I everybody's been talking about what can go wrong, but I think they've missed out on what could go right. If Alex Orji can get down throwing the ball, if he can show a little more promise in that side, he's an amazing runner. They have an amazing run game that I think is not being talked about as much. Yes, their O line will be worse, but worse off of two-time Joe Moore award winning, it's still going to be great. They have arguably the best defense in the country, competing with Ohio State, and I think in that category. So Michigan, if the ball bounces right for them, they could be repeating. If it goes wrong, they could be 7-3 or my bad, 7-5. And we play 12 games, don't we? But they've got that test game against Texas in week 2 that we will both be watching. I know that for a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just if the ball bounces their way again, they could win the Big Ten, and I think that's not spoken up enough. But there are certainly still major questions.
Yeah, and everyone wrote them off originally. I mean, everyone's saying like, "Oh, this team got decimated. You lost J.J. McCarthy. You lost Blake Corum. What's really going to be left of this team?" And I mean, they're being very overlooked. Again, I understand where it's coming from. You have Ohio State, who basically seems like the upper echelon team, probably the second highest odds of winning the entire national championship. And then you got teams like Oregon, who are not far behind at all. I'm pretty sure they're ranked 3 on the AP polls, 3 or 4 behind Texas. But Michigan is still a great team. Alex Orji is very fast. He's probably the opposite of J.J. McCarthy in the fact that he's more reliant on scrambling. He's a good quarterback. You have Donovan Edwards, who, I mean, had an outstanding year as the quote-unquote backup, even though I think they were both worthy enough to be running back 1, 2, or both meaning being running back 1 because they were both just so stellar. And then you have an insane defense. I mean, we have Will Johnson, who is arguably the best player in the country, for sure the best secondary player in the country at the quarterback position. And then you have other players like Kenneth Grant, who's going to be on the defensive line, and we know how problematic that defensive line was, especially for heavy running teams. So you cannot write off Michigan. They have to be somewhere at the top. It's just, again, when you're competing with Ohio State and Oregon, Ohio State almost seems like they want to win the big game or the game so badly, as now they're pretty sure they've lost 4 straight, that it's going to be like weighing on them too. And so that's just a little bit of reason why we put them in contenders and not up here in champions or not below in spoilers. Moving on, we got the Hoosiers. Kieran, where are we putting these
Yeah.
guys?
So another middle of the pack team doesn't really have, I think, the chops to take it the extra mile and compete with the big boys. But I would say they're about on the level of Michigan State. not quite a bottom feeder. There aren't really many bottom feeders in the Big Ten, but it's I don't think they can really take it to the next level this year. And they don't really look to be on a huge upward trajectory right now, but maybe they can prove me wrong.
Yeah, and they're kind of like some of the other middle of the pack teams that we've mentioned, where they're basically sticking around. I mean, Baylor, like we said, they're going to be in the middle of the pack. They're not really making any of these big moves. They don't really have someone that is worthy of saying like Heisman contention or any of these big trophies or impact players. And that's the same thing with Indiana. I mean, it's just where the cookie crumbles in the end. They're not really that going to be that great of a team. They're not going to again compete with the likes of Iowa's defense, Ohio State, all of them. But they're not going to be your worst team. There's always going to be a battle for the middle of the pack, and that's where we see them being. All right, next up is talking about the most great defense and the worst offense ever imaginable. Iowa Hawkeyes.
Yeah, so Iowa's had a rough offseason. It looks like their defense is still good and their offense really hasn't taken the strides that were expected and needed them to take to turn them into a true contender and a potential champion. Obviously, the divisions are now gone, and that probably doesn't hurt anyone more than it hurts Iowa because now they've got to play and compete against the best teams in the conference, not the best teams in their subdivision of the conference. So to me, Iowa, maybe they're a spoiler. I think they've certainly got spoiler potential if they're able to score more than 9 points. So I think that's where they belong.
Yeah, and Iowa hasn't been able to make that many big moves this offseason. And it's kind of trending in the same familiar path that we've always seen. They do good they do good on the defensive side, but they still have no production on the offense. They have no run game. They aren't able to develop anything. Hopefully, the offensive coordinator can come up with something to push them over the edge, but still not a bad team. I mean, when there was divisions, Iowa was typically the top of their division, going off against now Ohio State or Michigan. But in this case, now that they've gotten rid of it, it's hard for them to compete again, especially with Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. So now they're really going to have to feel the full impact of the Big Ten. But I mean, they're still a great defense. They can probably hold a team that's worthy, maybe Oregon, if they're able to make a stop on defense and force a tight game. So they might be a spoiler ruining one of these other guys. Next up, we got Maryland. Where do we see him falling?
I think Maryland's a middle of the pack team. Obviously, they lost Taulia Tagovailoa, I believe, to the draft or to the NFL. So they're going to take a step back, and the Turtles are not going to be going anywhere at a great rate of speed as one would expect. And I just don't think that Maryland can really compete last year. Last year, as much as I hate to admit it, they gave Michigan some problems. They were able to be that cupcake that you choke on. I don't know if they can be that this year, but they're certainly going to try.
Yep. And like Kieran said, you lost your quarterback. You're not going to be able to fight as well, especially with a new offense. That's why we always give these taxes to teams like Michigan. Anyone who loses their quarterback, Ohio State even might get taxed for that. But for that reason, yeah, we see them falling in the middle of the pack to compete with some of these other guys, Michigan State and Indiana. All right, next up we got Golden Gophers. Where will they fall?
I Minnesota's another middle of the pack team for me. They're improving, and that has to be said. I think that eventually they will be relevant again. I just don't think that it's this year. Honestly, I think that they've got quite a just a tough schedule, and it's a tough environment to rebuild a team in. And I think they're going to need at least one more year before we're talking about them as being super relevant. But I do love me some Golden Gophers.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to put these guys anywhere. Last season, they were really more of a bottom feeder based off of their production. They were 3-6 in conference play. I mean, they came second to last against Illinois, and especially with this new conference, it's just going to be more problematic. So they're probably going to be towards the back here, the middle of the pack, if not to the top of the bottom feeders, along with Indiana. All right, now we got a fun one. We got the Huskies. Where are we putting the Huskies, Kieran?
The Cornhuskers. See. I wouldn't correct you, but there actually is a team that's Huskies that comes later.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah. My bad.
Yeah, so the Nebraska Cornhuskers, I think they're solidly in spoilers. Again, freshman Dylan Raiola, if he plays with his hair on fire, obviously he can give them a chance. They have elite quarterback play. Their defense looks to be trending better. They've just got a solid amount of, I think, potential. And you've got to have faith in Matt Rule and you've got to have faith in what he's doing there. Thus, I think they belong in spoilers.
Yeah. And my bad for getting the name wrong. I read Huskies. I don't know why I did. But some interesting news about their quarterback over there, Dylan Raiola, is that he actually trains with the same quarterback coach that coaches Patrick Mahomes and Quinn Ewers. And he's supposedly this guru of quarterback coaches. And even his little brother are supposed to be two of the amazing quarterbacks. And he openly says that he will be the next coming of almost a like top tier quarterback, Mariota. He'll be somewhere as a legend. So if someone from Patrick Mahomes' own like facility says that he's going to be good, you have to almost trust it. Next up, we got Northwestern.
Yeah, so Northwestern's another middle of the pack team for me. I think they're going to take a step back from their amazing season last year, and we've got to give props to Northwestern. Incredible season, making it to the bowl game, doing amazing things after their 1-11 year. But I still think that the footing is not underneath them, right? Like they did that thing we all did in elementary school where they said build the tallest tower with spaghetti, and you made a tiny little base and then tried to make a giant tower and it fell over, right? Sure, you were up there for a little bit, but you haven't built the pyramid that you really need to get to the top. Pyramids that teams like Michigan, Georgia, Ohio State, teams like that have. So, thus, I think they're going to fall back a little bit, slide back down the hill, and be in that middle of the pack with your Michigan States, your Indiana, your Minnesotas. And that's actually setting up a lot of really great games in the middle of the pack that I think people are going to sleep on.
Yeah. And the cool thing about Kieran's analogy is it's so true. Northwestern had an unbelievable season, going 8-5, finishing second only behind Iowa, and I believe it was the East, or no, the West. I mean, but what you have to keep in mind is Kieran was right about the whole like tower situation. Teams like Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, they're so foundationally sound based off of their program, their history, tradition, like the feeling of wanting to go play for these teams. Northwestern experienced almost like a TCU moment where they jumped to the tallest tower, but again, they weren't like strong foundationally to where everything can crumble real fast, as we saw with TCU last season. And so, yeah, they went from being almost a spoiler to now falling back to the middle of the pack. I wouldn't put them this low if we were ranking them. I'd probably bump them up a little bit, like up here, around here. But we'll just put them there for right now. But yeah, we do see a regression forming. But next up, we see a team that definitely won't have a regression, or at least not predicted to. Kieran, where do we see the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I think they've got to go on champions, mostly because the pressure is so high, right? This team is probably the most stacked team we've seen in college football since teams like your 2020 Alabama, maybe even your 2022 Georgia, 2019 LSU, teams like that. That is the caliber that this team has the potential to be, right? You've got Jeremiah Smith, who could be a star as a freshman. You have Caleb Downs. There are more people on this team that I could make a case could play Heisman caliber football this year than on any other team, and probably in the rest of the Big Ten combined. And that is a crazy statement, but I think it's true. And that is how stacked Ohio State is. And if they don't win, it's on Ryan Day's back this year. So they've got to be in champions.
Yeah, and perfectly said by Kieran. It's if they don't win, I feel like it's going to be catastrophic because it's like this whole like anticipation. Like now, it's your time to shine. You have everybody in every position. There should be no reason why you should fall. And so, on paper, you are the best team in the Big Ten. Hell, maybe you are the best team in college football based off of everybody you have. Will Howard, who we know is solid. Jeremiah Smith is going to come in and be solid. Emeka Egbuka, who's already a solid wide receiver. Running backs, do I even have to mention Quinshawn Judkins and Trayvon Henderson? You're set. So now this is your year. If it does crumble the wrong way and you do fall, I honestly see a lot of decommits. I see a lot of people coming out and saying that Ohio State cannot be trusted. All right, enough about the Buckeyes. Let's move on to the Ducks, the Pac-12 winners or losers technically. Um, the winners and losers. Oregon.
Yeah. So Oregon, they have, I think, just a few more questions than Ohio State. It's a very, very narrow margin for me. And for me, the bigger questions come on defense. Yes, they have a solid defensive line group, but is that back half of your defense, is it as solid as it needs to be when it's going to be tested up against great wide receivers and also just great offenses in general in the Big Ten? But to me, Oregon's very solid offensively, right? You've got Dylan Gabriel, if he can play well. If he can't, you got Dante Moore backing him up. Very solid QB room. I haven't heard Dante Moore's name enough. You've got Evan Stewart, who transferred in from A&M, could be a big impact player out there, out wide. And I think Oregon, if Ohio State stumbles, if Ohio State falls to Oregon and Eugene, if Michigan gives Ohio State problems, then Oregon will be right there. The Ducks are going to pick up the scraps. Maybe it's breadcrumbs, whatever. And they'll be on their merry way to a first round bye and a great shot at a national championship. I
Yeah.
think Oregon, they've got a great shot at the national championship. And if you asked me to bet, right, a blind bet, knowing what I know about these two rosters, and asked who I thought would win a national championship first, Ryan Day at Ohio State or Dan Lanning at Oregon, I would pick Dan Lanning in Oregon, but maybe I'm crazy just from how I think he's able to coach and add that little something that you don't see but is present there that isn't just in the roster and the caliber of player you have.
Yeah. The only thing I can add to that is Ohio State is probably the most sound team. The only part I would disagree on with Kieran is I think Ohio State is ready for a national championship, at least if not now, next year, and if not next year, now. I don't know if Oregon compete. There's a lot of questions I have for Oregon, and it's the same ones I have for Ohio State. But Oregon's main thing is like, will Oregon be able to produce with Dylan Gabriel? I mean, Dylan Gabriel, of course, is a very solid quarterback, as we saw on the Red River. But again, he does stumble a little bit sometimes. He might have a few mistakes, and then how will that play out? Why is Dante Moore not being mentioned enough in the media? Why aren't they talking about how there's a bigger QB battle going on over there? And I feel like there's a lot of hype on Oregon for this reason, if not like I don't know. I just felt like there's a little bit too much hype going on for Oregon, so I can honestly see them being outplayed by maybe a Michigan, maybe a Penn State. But I feel like if Oregon can play to the expectation everyone is projecting, they are going to be a very solid team. They're going to be up in the champions, but not quite yet. Kieran, do we want to match them with Ohio State, or do we just want
I
to?
think so, yes.
Yeah. All righty, moving on. We got Penn State Nittany Lions, a team that is always so far back, but always so far in it. Kieran, where do they go?
Yeah, so Penn State, the chronic. I've never seen a lion, let alone a Nittany lion, choke on anything, but they manage to do it each and every year. Certainly, they're a contender this year. If they're not able to get into that backfield with Abdul Carter, if their offense isn't more consistent, and obviously, I mean, I've heard this from NFL teams that they have not sold their stock in Drew Aller yet. They don't think that he's a failure. They think he still has that potential. I I'm not sure if I see it. I'm gonna watch Penn State football. Obviously, I am. You've got to see the white out, the stripe out, the blue out. I don't know what else they do, but obviously, that home field is amazing, and it's gonna be a joy to watch them play this Saturday. Not this Saturday, but this fall on Saturday. Whoa. Um, but I don't know. They might be able to have it. They might not. They're a hard team to predict. They always are. I lean towards the choke, but then everybody says, "Oh no, they're not going to choke this year."
Yeah, it's just Penn State is the best number 3 team in the nation. I feel like they always finish third best in the Big Ten. They're always not talked about, meaning like everyone gives them hype. Oh, it's Penn State. Oh, they're a very good team. Well, I mean, can you really be that good if you're always third? I mean, there's really, for the last 2 years, at least from my perspective, I feel like the drop off has been Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and then there's been another drop off to maybe Iowa. But I think this year they can definitely make moves. You have a great defensive end, Abdul Carter, Drew Aller. Like Karen said, no one stole, or they haven't gotten rid of him. He's still in consideration to be a great quarterback. He does have incredible arm strength. I think James Franklin though needs to pull out a big season here. Of course, you do have the 12-team playoffs, so there is a very, very good shot that you still make it in the playoffs. No one's writing you off, and I think if you do, you need to make a name for yourself to establish that you're still a great team, even though it just hasn't been shown in the Big Ten because either you've been outshone or outshined by Ohio State or Michigan. Anyways, we got Boilermakers up next. Boilermakers. All right, Karen, where are we putting the Boilermakers?
Yeah, Boilermakers and bottom feeders. I don't really see it. I I just don't see it. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Purdue, please stick to basketball because at least you'll have more success over there. I don't think they can compete with these other teams. Maybe you might see a good showing against Purdue, or Indiana, Purdue, Minnesota, but I mean, who's really going to tune in to see those games? Anyways, sorry Purdue for that absolute like backlash I just gave you. Moving on, we got the Rutgers.
yeah. Rutgers has the one of the easiest schedules in the country. Certainly, the easiest schedule in a big conference. I believe they dodge all of the top four teams as we have it right now. So there's a potential that you could see like a 10-2 Rutgers or something. They have improved quarterback play, and it really looks like Rutgers is on an upward trajectory. I honestly would say they're either at the front of the middle of the pack, or I'd think they're a spoiler. I think there's a chance that they could ruin someone else's big time just because of record and the way the playoff committee selects.
Yeah, and Kieran is right. They won't be playing Ohio State, Oregon, or Michigan, or Penn State. The team they will be playing is a team that we're yet to rank, and that is USC and Washington. Uh, Based off their schedule, it looks absolutely like it looks. If you're a Rutgers fan, it looks delicious. Is the best word I can go with. You really have no problem. I mean, you might have to play Nebraska, and that could be a big decision for y'all if you're gonna win or not. But I do see you playing well. Spoilers to middle of the pack, I think, is exactly where you belong. The question is really, do you think you can beat Nebraska? I think this matchup right here, I don't know what week it's on, but whatever week you have Nebraska Rutgers, October 5th, I feel like it's going to be a really good game that people are going to overlook, but definitely tune into that one because you're going to see some big moves.
Yeah, I would say their hardest game is either that Nebraska game or Virginia Tech on the 21st of September. So if you're a Rutgers football fan, watch out. Other than that, they do play USC and they will probably take a loss there. But other than that, it's really hard for me to find a loss for Rutgers.
Yeah. All right, and then moving on, we got the Bruins without Chip Kelly this season. So where does that put them, Kieran?
I think they're another middle of the pack team. They lost Dante Moore, and it's really hard to replace that kind of a player when you're UCLA, at least in football terms. So I think they've got to go in middle of the pack this year. I think they can compete with some of those teams, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, and I think they're just going to be a middle of the pack team also based off their schedule. I mean, you host LSU on September 21st, and then you have to go straight back and play Oregon. And then after Oregon, you got Penn State, which I feel like you're just not going to win a game there. And so, besides that, at least you'll get your tough games out the way, and then you can maybe turn it up for the rest of the season. But definitely not going to be a spoiler. I think they definitely should sit in the middle of the pack, especially losing a head coach and a quarterback.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a very interesting team up next. We have the Trojans. Where do they go?
Yeah. So I think they're a spoiler, and this is because of one reason and one reason only. I don't think their defense has improved as much as it needs to, despite Lincoln Riley's promises and attesting to changing everything for defense. He won't. He's Lincoln Riley. Come on. Um, but I think they have a Lincoln Riley offense, and that always makes you dangerous. If you're playing an Iowa or a Michigan and they can't get their passing game going for whatever reason, they're just missing that day. They throw a pick or two. USC can be right there because if you don't lock them down, boom, they put 50 on you, right? And that's the very thing that kind of makes a Lincoln Riley team a Lincoln Riley team. And so that's what I would be worried about when USC comes to town.
Yeah, and I mean, you have players like Jordan Maeva who are definitely going to be a impact team. Uh, it's just going to be very. It's. I mean, you're going to have a regression of a year. You lost your number one quarterback. Arguably, could say one of the best quarterbacks to come through college football. Um, there's just not much else to say. You're definitely going to have. I think it's definitely going to be a regression year. I don't know if you're going to out perform to the way you did at the Pac-12. I don't know why I'm stumbling on my words. Definitely, Lincoln Riley is definitely a great offensive coach. You're definitely going to be outstanding when it comes to that point. But again, can the defense really hold up their end of the bargain? Can they hold teams, or is it always going to be a shootout? So definitely a spoiler, but I don't know if they can compete with some of the elite defenses, especially if their defense can't cooperate. Then what are you going to do against some of the offensives like Ohio State? Moving on to another team that may have a big fall off, Washington.
Yeah, I think Washington. That kind of hurts me to say it, but I think they're middle of the pack. They got absolutely raided by Kalen DeBoer going to Alabama. That double 1-2 punch and Jed Fish coming in and going to the Big Ten. The turnover has been insane, and you didn't even get the boons you expected. Like, you have to expect that you would at least get maybe a Titaroa McMillan or a Noah Fafita for your trouble going to Washington to follow their head coach, but they didn't. And I think that's a really key component, and Jed Fish is going to have to completely rebuild Washington. I'm not sure why he took the job, other than that, if you'll remember, Arizona's athletic department is a bit in shambles. So that's, again, why he took the job. But for football reasons, Washington's in a pretty bad place right now.
Yeah. And again, when you lose a head coach, it's a very bad situation. At least you still got a promising one from Arizona. But again, like Kieran said, the fact that no one came by, you lost a lot of people. A lot of people left the door. You're expecting this team to regress. I mean, it's just due to collapse. And so, of course, we're not going to predict them to say, oh, they're probably going to be back in the playoffs, number 3 seed. No, that's definitely not going to happen. It's going to be a definite regression. And so they probably will be around Northwestern, if not a little bit higher up here in the middle of the pack. Okay, our last two, we got Wisconsin. So where does Wisconsin Badgers go?
Yeah, so they got Tyler Van Dyke, and he was just announced as their starter recently. Word is he's doing pretty well there. Hopefully, he can mitigate the turnovers. I think they're another spoiler team. I think they're a tier above your Northwesterns, your UCLAs, but I don't know how much of a step they can take in terms of punching at contenders. So I'd say they're a low spoiler, but there's a chance that they get dangerous and you get badgered.
Yeah. Like Kieran said, you got some promising pieces, especially Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, who's definitely a big land, especially for Wisconsin. He should definitely make an impact. But again, like I said in the previous episodes, I go based off of the other teams. I don't see them competing with the likes of Penn State and Michigan to push them into contenders. And even Iowa is definitely going to be a big challenge. Alrighty, and our last team is Grambling State, Kieran. I'm just kidding. That is not Grambling State. That is Illinois for the sake of this.
We may have done a little whoopsie.
Yeah, it's all right, though. Where do we want to put Illinois?
I'd say they're another middle of the pack team. Obviously, they have Kyle McCord. He transferred there from Ohio State. And now looking at Kyle McCord's stats, he actually wasn't that bad. And I kind of feel bad for the dude. But I guess he was not CJ Stroud. I will put it that way.
Kyle McCord went to Syracuse.
Oh, he went to Syracuse. My bad. Yes. What am I doing? Gosh, the orange teams. Oh, today has been rough, y'all. So I went on my Kyle McCord tangent, which should have been in completely the wrong episode. Ignore that. It's live, so we can't cut it.
What are you going to do about it? It's right. Yeah. Illinois, they had a really bad season last year. I mean, with all things considered. Yeah. I believe I think they finished 1-8 in conference play. I could be wrong there. They're definitely going to have some progression, especially come the season, but it's going to be a hard way to rank them. Or, they didn't finish 1-8. That was Indiana. They finished 3-6. Again, it's Illinois. I mean, their schedule seems fine. I don't think they have anybody big to play. Yeah, they just have your typical Kansas, Nebraska. They do have Oregon and Michigan to deal with, but Again, they're not going to be a great team, so we're just going to leave them. We're going to leave Grambling State / Illinois towards the bottom here near Indiana. Okay, well, that wraps up this episode, or this not this episode. This wraps up this tier list. I almost got ahead of myself. This tier list for the Big Ten. Now, moving on, we have some impact players, and we're going to get straight to that for y'all right now.
Yeah.
Okay, Kieran, you can start it out.
All right. So your first impact player is, of course, Caleb Downs. If he plays like Ed Reed, Ohio State will be very hard to stop. Again, amazing player at Alabama. If Alabama still had him, I think I would be talking very differently about their potential in the SEC. But could potentially be a very fringe Heisman contender. Great player, generational talent.
Yeah. Next up, we got Dylan Gabriel, transfer quarterback from Oklahoma. Of course, is very, very good. Was able to beat Texas in the Red River Shootout, Red River rivalry, however way you want to put it. If he can play the way that he played during that game, and if he can maintain that for a full season, it's going. That Oregon offense is going to be so potent. They're going to be big trouble, especially for teams like Ohio State to be able to stop. And that game will be an outstanding game to go watch. But if he can't produce the way he did, it could be a rocky season. They might have to make some tough decisions in the quarterback room, and Dante Moore might have to step up. But hopefully, if you're an Oregon fan, it's the prior. Alrighty. And then next up, we got Jeremiah Smith. Kieran, break him down for us.
Yeah, so freshman wide receiver, we've heard he's been doing amazing in camp up there, putting the Jets on some people, making some great catches. He is the talent that he's been billed as. And again, if he can be part of that 1-2 punch with Emeka Ibuka, it could be lights out for the rest of the Big Ten.
Oh, yeah. Next up, we got Michigan Wolverines. We got his very own Kenneth Grant. He is the starting defensive lineman. I mean, he had a great season last year. He had 29 tackles. I'm not looking at the right thing. My bad, guys. He's going to be part of that very dominant run defense. Of course, we saw in the championship game, he was able to very much stop Alabama whenever they ran against Jalen Milroe and their running back. It's just going to be a great way. He's going to be part of a great front seven or front five or whatever you want to put it. He's going to be a big impact player. All right, moving on, we got Zachariah Branch.
Yeah, so he's the dynamic punt returner and wide receiver for USC. They've actually got a whole core of these guys, and he's kind of a stand-in for 4 names or 3 names. Him, Deuce Robinson, and Makai Lemon. Great core. They're a young core, but have the potential to be some breakout talent and make Miller Moss look absolutely amazing on the football field come November.
And then lastly, we have Abdul Carter. I know we've spoken about him a little bit before in this episode. He is the defensive end out of Penn State, and I mean, he's going to be your next Chop Robinson. He is the next great defensive end to come out of Penn State, following the likes of Micah Parsons, like I said, Chop Robinson. Expect him to have a great season, stopping the run, being a very impact player, and going for a lot of sacks, which could wreak havoc on bigger teams.
Okay, can I just make a note here? It is crazy that Micah Parsons has spent the vast majority of his career playing for teams that are known for choking. My guy, please go play for some team where your offense actually does something for you.
Please. Broncos, especially.
Wow, that's crazy.
Throwing it out there.
Shameless plug here. All right. Another note, Evan Stewart, again, could be a crazy impact wide receiver, a target for Oregon. So now we have coach and player of the year. My coach of the year, personally, and this may come as a slight surprise, I don't think anyone will have ever seen this coming. To me, it's Sharon Moore. I've been high on Michigan. I think they'll figure it out. If not, they'll just shove it down your throat, and they don't care what they've figured out. And to me, Sharon Moore is the coach of the year. But for player of the year, I got to go somewhere else. I personally think that it's going to be, well, there's no other way to say this. I think it could be Will Howard. I think he could step up. You could see the flashes at Kansas State becoming absolutely incredible. and break out. I know these seem contradictory, but keep in mind it's possible for Ohio State to win the conference, Michigan to beat Ohio State, and then both to have a run in the playoffs. Because it's 12 team now, every game is not sudden death or elimination. That's why I'm going for the split there, a little good old fashioned the game. So yeah, Kirtan, what do you got?
Yeah, and then for my coach of the year, I think I'm going to have to go with Carolina Panthers ex-head coach Matt Rule. He seems to be making big moves, especially in the offseason, picking up players or poaching players, you can say, from Georgia, most notably Dylan Raiola. He's going to be great. I feel like I believe Nebraska Cornhuskers are going to be on the up and up. They're going to have a better season, definitely a more potent offense, and I think Matt Rule is just going to try to build a new legacy over there, at least one that stays around for longer. Player of the year, I mean, this can go in many different directions. I do think it's going to have to be an Ohio State player, and I do think it's probably going to be Emeka Egbuka. I think that if I go with a wide receiver here, it'd be the best situation. I mean, they had weapons all around. They're always the number one They are wide receiver to be honest. You have Marvin Harrison, who was a main component last year, but I remember in all these big games, it was Emeka, the slot receiver, making the big plays, making the big catches, and scoring all the touchdowns. I think that he's just going to have a breakout year and try to push his way into being a first-round pick. So that wraps up that segment on the Big Ten. Moving on, we have some Week 0 game predictions. Starting off with Week 0 game of the week, Florida State versus Georgia Tech.
Yeah, this is in Ireland, so there's no at anybody, except for a good pint of Guinness and whatever else they do in Ireland. I don't know. I should know more. I'm slightly ashamed. I'm a little bit Irish, but whatever. This is neither here nor there, but I will love watching the Aer Lingus Classic is always my favorite time of the year. Definitely, totally, and we are not sponsored.
Yeah. Just some other notable information about the game. FSU is favored minus 11.5. Especially you're going to see a new quarterback. We're going to see if DJ Uiagalelei is going to be able to at least play better than he did at Clemson and rejoin the ACC with some pride. We're going to see if they're really a national contender like they were last year or if there was a big drop-off there. So if we had to give it a ranking, I would honestly have to say that Florida State would probably win. I think Kieran would almost agree with me. But, yeah, that's where we have it. Alrighty.
So we do have to pick this game.
Yeah.
Typically, this year we're going to be doing full scores too, so y'all can roast us for being wrong about more stuff. But I am actually going to say that Haynes King and Georgia Tech pull off a high octane stunner like they have been known to do and wont to do in the past. And they're able to beat Florida State by 3. Oh, gosh. What is the score? What is the score? I'm going 45-42.
Oh, my gosh. I think you're totally wrong. I'm going to go the entire opposite direction. I'm going to say that Georgia Tech gets defeated big time by Florida State. I think Florida State's going to try to make a name for themselves, prove that last season wasn't a fluke. I see it actually saying 45. I'm just going to say 45-10.
Oh, my gosh. So that is perhaps the biggest – the beyond the stat point spread is so incredibly wide.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't take our advice as betting advice, please. Good Lord.
Please don't. Or do not blame us. And if we do win you money, please comment down below we won you money because then we get more followers. Thank you. Moving on, we have some more teams who are playing in Week 0. We have SMU, a school that I just went to go tour, versus Nevada. Where do we put them, Green?
So SMU is going to absolutely beat Nevada, but the big question for me in this game is: are they playing Power 4 caliber football? Do they beat them physically? Do they look a class above this G5 team? That's my question. I think SMU will answer that convincingly. I have SMU winning, something along the lines of, let's say 42-7.
Yeah, and I think SMU is going to have a great season. Maybe a little bit of bias because when I was touring, the guy told me and was trying to fill my head with all these thoughts of SMU being outstanding. But again, they just won the independent, I think, or Conference USA. I think they're going to be good. I think they're going to make a big move over to the ACC and, again, project themselves as a top team, or at least try to. I don't think Nevada can stay with them. I think it's going to be a confident win. Maybe not as big as Kieran's, but I'm going to say, oh, this is the hardest part. I'm not going to lie. 14
Uh-huh.
to 30. No, 14 to 42 SMU.
All right. Yeah, so the next game, these two games are kind of nothing burgers, but it is football. One of them does kick off at 11 p.m. at night. If you stay up till 11 p.m. this Saturday to watch football, you're a sicko, Kirtan. Um, Delaware State plays Hawaii. It's in Oahu. I have seen Hawaii Stadium. It is beautiful. Not as close to the water as they would make you think, but all of Hawaii is pretty close to the water, so you know. But Hawaii's going to win this one 35-10. I don't know.
I feel like this should definitely be a confident win for Hawaii. It's in your own area. I mean, please don't lose because that'd be kind of embarrassing. I'm going to stick with some lower scores. I'm going to go 24-7.
All right. All right.
And then lastly, we have a fun one for whoever wants to watch Montana State play New Mexico.
Okay.
Uh,
New Mexico beat Auburn last year. I mean, they'll
uh,
be making it to the Power Four anytime now. Conference realignment.
yeah.
In all seriousness, come on, Auburn.
Yeah. Well, maybe the Aggies will have better success, but again, I don't see them really. Or I don't know why I said Aggies. I don't know how I want to break this game. I'm going to say 20. Oh, gosh. Delaware. I'm getting thrown for a loop because how good can Montana State be?
I think they're
40.
pretty good. The line had them like favored by like 15.
I know. But I'm going to go big. I'm going to go 47 to 17. 48 to 17. 48 to 17.
Okay. Wait, who's winning?
Oh, New Mexico.
Oh, okay. Um, I'm gonna pick Montana State 21-10.
Alrighty.
Yeah, so now that you've watched us suffer through that, Kirtan, what is your Big Ten related bold prediction?
Okay. My Big Ten bold prediction for this year will be Trayvon Henderson will be more of an impactful player. He might not have as much yards or as many touchdowns, but he will be more of an impactful player than Quinshon Judkins.
Yeah, so no matter what happens to Trayvon Henderson, he will be out with an ACL injury in the second week, and Kirtan will make the argument that that ACL injury rallied the team to a national championship.
Exactly.
I will go right back at you. I am going to say, Will Howard is the consensus best quarterback in the Big Ten.
Ooh, okay. Well, that one's gonna have to be a wait and see one because that's both these predictions are going to be towards the end.
Very long term.
Yeah, we're gonna have to see towards the end. Anyways, that has been episode 26 of the Beyond the Sport or Beyond the Snap podcast. It's been a bad day, guys. We're in a rush. But yeah, that's been episode 26 of Beyond the Snap podcast. If you like the episode, please consider subscribing, giving us a thumbs up, commenting what you believe was the better bold prediction. If you think our scores are totally wrong, and please flame us in the comments if one of these games ends up being like SMU losing 7-82. Anyways, that's it for me, Kieran. Anything else?
Nope. I'm super excited for college football, and everyone else should be too.
We will see you next week when we cover week 0 review and start predicting week 1 games. All right.
Yeah,
Peace.